Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Content Warfare TV. Glad to be back. Glad to have everyone back. This week, we are joined. We have a very special guest on, someone who actually reached out to me. And Gabriel, you'll know that I very rarely accept people who kind of reach out to me initially, but I'm intrigued. I love the topic. I think that you're a perfect guest for the show. And Gabriel Weinberg, the founder of DuckDuckGo and the author of a brand new book, which I am extremely interested in, Traction, is visiting us today. How are you, sir?
Thanks for having me. So I reached out to you on Twitter, I think, right?
Yeah.
Was that a appropriate place to reach out? That's one
it's awesome.
advice that I usually give to people is like reach out to people on Twitter if you can.
Yes. See, I think it was great. I actually preferred that versus the PR company like 5 email in 10-hour blast that you usually get when someone like is reaching out to people, where it's like, 5 different PR companies sending out the same exact message trying to get you to have somebody on their show. And you reached out personally, and I love that, and it's great, and I'm glad that we're gonna have a chance to talk today.
Cool.
So let's kind of dive right into your history first, because I think that people have heard of DuckDuckGo, but it is an extremely kind of unique thing that you are building, and I'm really interested in kind of the genesis of it. So take us through, not every detail, obviously, but give us kind of a history of where this thing came from, and maybe just a few of the pieces that led up to your founding DuckDuckGo.
Sure. So I am 35, so I started doing startups right out of school. I went to MIT, so that was around 2000. And did a few that kind of went sideways, then did one that kind of took off, early social networking, find your old friends and classmates, which is completely anachronism now after Facebook. Sold that in 2000. Exactly. Sold that in 2006, moved from Boston to Philly, and then was kind of wide open again of what I'm going to do next. And one thing I had learned and decided was I was only going to work on something that I was more passionate about and that I could see myself doing for a decade, which is some of the best advice I can give to any person doing a startup. I'm happy to expand on that if you want. And so I started doing a bunch of different projects out of personal interest. I had some money now, to kind of self-fund things. And a few of those projects, I didn't set out to build a search engine, DuckDuckGo's a search engine, but kind of looked, had some ideas of search in them. And I put them together and said, this could be an interesting search engine. In particular, this was 2007, and I was kind of dissatisfied with Google results in terms of there was too much spam, I thought. And I also thought I was going to sites like Wikipedia and Yelp and just getting answers from those sites, and why couldn't those be on top of the search results and I didn't have to leave the search engine? So launched DuckDuckGo at the end of 2008 with better instant answers, less spam, and then have been slowly growing, but the numbers keep getting bigger because the percentage of growth has been about the same, 300 to 500% a year. And so we're kind of 6 years into this now, and at the beginning we might have been doing 10,000 searches a month. Now we're doing 150 million, and it's starting to really make an impact in the search market. That's the short story.
Yeah. So the very first thing that I think about when I think about DuckDuckGo, one of the things I find most interesting, and I kind of big part of it is the privacy issue, right? So everywhere you see in the About page, I actually shared before we went on here a microsite that you created about no tracking. What was it about the idea of privacy and about having your search history being private and all that and not being tracked? What drew you to that? Was it the technical aspects of building the engine, or just intrinsically you did not believe that people should be tracked when they're searching online?
It's a couple of different things. So I launched this thing without the privacy in mind. Not that it was a personal decision to do the privacy years before this became an issue. So I deeply care about it, but it wasn't in my mind. I wasn't thinking about it when creating the product. And so, I put it out there not knowing whether this was going to be a business or a startup or anything. And I was really listening for feedback in the early days. And this was on tech sites like Hacker News and Reddit. And if I didn't get good early feedback, the project might have died. But I got initial feedback that people were interested in it, And so then I was like, okay, this could maybe be a business. What is the thesis of this business? And that brought me to the analogy of web browsers, like Firefox, Chrome, IE, and that, there were these multiple browsers now that people preferred, but, they basically do the same thing. They render web pages. But yet people have strong preferences. Why is that? Because they have different user experiences, like some people like the design of Safari. Some people like the add-ons of Firefox and the privacy aspects of Firefox. So my thought was, search engines are trending toward that. They're reaching diminishing returns on the links, but there are a lot of experience things that make a better search experience that aren't just link-related. And so my thesis became, I'm going to focus on Google can only pick one direction for some of these things. Google can only be Google. But there is room for other search experiences in search once the links are basically the same everywhere. And so what are things that Google can't do easily that another search engine could? Either not for technical reasons, but because they've already picked a direction or legal or business reasons. And so I came to the conclusion that I'm going to focus on those things that differentiate from Google and that I think are just better user experiences. So the original two that I mentioned initially, spam, instant answers, those are still there. For various reasons of having to go to Google can't do those very well. Privacy is a third. Google's an advertising company. Tracking is embedded in their DNA. It turns out you actually don't need to track people to make money in web search because all the money is made off the keyword that you type in on Google AdWords. You type in car, you get a car ad. None of that has to do with you personally. And so it doesn't impact the business model in search. So if you're just a company that focuses on search, you can just not track people. So independent of that, I investigated the genesis of getting to the privacy was comments on Reddit asking me about my privacy policy. I went and investigated and was like, okay, you don't need to track people to make money. Additionally, tracking is super creepy. Google and search engines know everything about your search history. You share your personal, financial, medical problems with your search engine, not even thinking about it. And yet this information is being leaked to marketers all over the place. It's just not a good user experience. And so, and then the third piece was this data is being handed over to governments, which has been increasing, in the news now. But back then, you could see the trend going up and up. And I thought, hey, I can solve all this at once. Just not track people at all. Don't have to hand over data to governments. Still make money. Better user experience, and it just made 100% sense.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that because granted, I'm very much a neophyte to the whole the way a search engine works technically. Obviously, from a content marketing perspective, I have a fairly good idea. But Google would tell you, right, that the tracking allows them to provide more accurate, more targeted search results and ultimately ads as well. And what you're saying is that you don't actually need that to provide ultimately what would be the best solution inside a search engine.
Yeah, so
or a set of search. Yeah.
It turns out that most of what you want in terms of what you think is personalized is just localized. You want local weather, you want local restaurants. All that you can do without tracking you again. It's just based on your IP location, which you can throw away right after that search. So you search for weather, I know where you are, I show you the local weather. I don't have to store that, I don't have to know anything about you personally to do that. The actual deeper personalization stuff hasn't really been useful on the search results yet. And in fact, I would argue, this is another search experience question, like different people might prefer different things, but I would argue it actually does more harm than good. There's this concept called the filter bubble, where the extent that Google is tailoring their results, they're showing you things you're more likely to click on. So if you're like a Democrat searching abortion or something controversial where you're trying to just research, they're going to show you more democratic links, things that you already agree with, less opposing viewpoints that you're less likely to click on. And now you're living in this bubble world where you're trying to do research, but you're actually not doing objective research, which I think actually is a kind of pernicious problem. There's actually harms to it too. But I would say, maybe some large percentage of people prefer this ultimate personal experience, but there's some other percentage that says, I just want localization and I want objective results.
Yeah. It's interesting because I love Google Plus as a social network and the community that's built here, and that's mutually exclusive from the conversation we're having currently. But how I tie that in is the idea of authorship and the personalized bias that authorship can provide in search results for logged in users on Chrome, right? So I have explained the process of authorship before to people, and their response to me was, so if I connect with someone on Google Plus and I'm logged into Chrome, I'm not going to be able to get away from their content because Google's going to automatically show it higher. And it's funny, as a marketer, you love that concept of people not being able to get away, right? Like that's like your little spider web. Like, yeah, I got them. They can't get away from me. But from a searcher's perspective, it is a hindrance unless you are only connecting with the people that you really want to see their content in your search results. It does that. That bubble filter is really interesting, and I guess intrinsically it makes a ton of sense, but I never really spent any time thinking deeply about it. Are there any other ways that that Google captures you in this kind of bubble filter? Because this is a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah, I mean, so absolutely. We ran a study. This one's a couple of interesting points here. We ran a study where we had people search for the same results at the same time on political topics around the time of the election, and we uncovered that, they were, and then once we found this, the Wall Street Journal ran their own study to confirm it, and then ran a story on it. And what we found was they were inserting Obama links. If you had typed in Obama previously, you would get extra Obama results, but they weren't doing the same for Romney. And so it was implicitly giving millions of people kind of more Obama stuff, which is like an overriding kind of pernicious effect potentially of swaying an election, which I think may have actually had an effect. Now, you may like Obama or Romney, so like you might think that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just bad in general that it could happen surreptitiously. Yeah. Kind of algorithms gone amok is what the Wall Street Journal said. The other one is people have started to notice a lot ads following around the internet. And like you said, it's a double-edged sword. For marketers, retargeting has been great for a lot of companies. But for consumers, in a lot of cases, it is incredibly annoying to have you search for something and then for the next month, all you see is ads everywhere you go. And the problem with Google in particular on that problem is they run, 4 of the biggest ad networks. So it's not just the AdWords on Google. They run AdSense on millions of sites. AdMobs runs in millions of apps. And DoubleClick is the banner ads you see on all the web. And so it's like, you can't escape it if you're in the Google ecosystem, because even if you leave a Google site, you're still on their ad network. So that's kind of the other huge one that people are seeing.
Yeah, another interesting aspect of DuckDuckGo that when I was looking through it and I have used it before and tested different things. And it's clean, right? Like the results are very clean. And one of the things that you see Google doing is adding all these different knowledge graph and image carousels and trying to find more visual ways of kind of stuffing the page full of things to click on. What is your thought process behind the more clean design? It's just links and a description. It's very, you're looking right at the results. I mean, they're there, and it's hard to not know exactly where you want people to look. Like, what is the thought behind that, and how does that help people with their search experience?
So that is the 4th category of these things that I think we can differentiate on that Google can't do easily. So we had the spam, less spam, more instant answers, above the links. The privacy we mentioned. The 4th is design, and we just focus on web search, so we can make a clean design. I like to think of us as like the Apple of search engines, with a nice clean design. Whereas Google has 100 different products. Search is the one that people are using the most, and so naturally they have an incentive to promote their own products inside the search results. Google Plus is a big example of that. To a lot of people who don't like that. We have no incentive to put something like Google Plus in our search results because we don't have a Google Plus. So to us, it's like people just want to get answers quickly with the least mental overhead or effort possible, and that equals clean design. And so, we think that's just a better search experience.
Yeah. I want to go back to the example you gave with Obama in particular, and then focus it on like a more overarching theme, and that is, Google's entire search experience is built on trust, right? Like this idea that you type something in, at least in those organic search results, that box that seems to be getting smaller and smaller, that those are trustworthy. Their best guess at the most or the best solution for whatever problem you typed in the thing. Do you think that? Do you think these things that they're doing with Knowledge Graph, with things like what happened with Obama, with putting authorship images in, taking them away, attaching Google Plus, do you ultimately think that that's taking away from the trust? Like, are they doing too much here, or trying to fix something that maybe wasn't broken?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think so. I mean, they would say, in their defense, we're running lots of experiments. We see that these things are adding value according to our metrics in some cases, and so we're doing them. The flip side of that is twofold. One is their metrics are what you click on, and that's where you get in this bubble problem. And Facebook has the same problem. I'm going to try to show you things that I think you're going to click on most is not necessarily what you want when you're trying to do research on the web. And that is kind of in conflict, I think. So, I mean, that's like the main conflict there. The second one is this, when we're talking about the Obama one, it's this algorithms run amok stuff. It's this unintended consequences. Like, I don't think they intended for at all, and that's what they said, for Obama to have that effect and Romney not. That just happened because no one's watching it, because it is just an algorithm, and for whatever reason, Obama came out of that and Romney didn't. But it had this massive effect, and so when you run all these experiments, you're going to get unintended consequences.
Yeah, that's it's funny, I felt that way recently. 5 years ago, it didn't feel like they were doing so many experiments, and you could kind of do a thing and know that the thing was going to kind of keep working the way it was, and it almost seems like on a daily basis there's a new update that changes the rules. And for people on Google Plus and a lot of the listeners and viewers of the show, Google Plus is a big part of just their social experience, if not business experience, and all of a sudden it's just like authorship gone. And now you're like, okay, maybe I invested myself in it, maybe I didn't, but either way, like, here's something that I had kind of built into my process, and now it has taken away. And I haven't really appreciated that. I know it keeps the SEOs in business, but it gives us stuff to talk about, right? So the last piece about DuckDuckGo that I want to talk about, because I think this is one of the reasons why, in doing my research on the company, that it seems has really kind of driven a lot of your success, is community that you've built. Like, you really invest in people who don't actually work for the company. So can you talk a lot about this community that you've built around the platform itself and how they're helping you to develop a better search engine?
Yeah, there's a couple aspects to this. So one is, instant answers, I think, are kind of the future, and I alluded to that starting the company based on instant answers. And one of the ways we thought we can differentiate is, on instant answers. And so here's the idea is, when you're searching, you're mainly looking for an answer, right? Oftentimes, for the big categories, you know where to go. Like, you want to go to Yelp for restaurants or Wikipedia for biographical information. But there are literally now thousands of these sites, and I'm sure some of the listeners are the owners of these sites, who are like the expert at Lego parts or, Pokemon or something. And what we wanted to do is, we're a small team. We will never be able to have knowledge of all these topics. Google's approach has been a closed approach of just, we're going to either figure it out ourselves algorithmically, like authorship, or we're going to buy companies, like travel or something, to put the data in. The approach that we took, which we thought we'd compete on, is completely open. What we said is, we're going to open source this whole thing. we're going to get our users to tell us, I'm into Lego parts. This site is the best site. I'm going to also develop the answer. So like you can come up with an idea, you can tell us the best source, you can go out and code it, and then it'll show up on DuckDuckGo for everyone. And ultimately there, we hope to have, thousands of sources in an open way on the search engine. Right now we have hundreds. So we're like, you can see the fruits of it. So that's one aspect, is we're relying on our community to tell us where the best sources are and actually to develop them. The other aspect is our team is 100% hired from this community, so our actual staff. And so we've, from day one, I self-funded and ran it myself actually the first 3.5 years, and then our first hire was from the community, and then it just worked out so well. I was like, the longer I can repeat this, the better. And so we've hired everyone from the community so far, and we have no intention of stopping.
How do you maintain the validity? Like, how do you kind of just cross-reference to make sure that the Lego site that John is pulling in and developing, that is the best site on Lego development, and he's not saying that there's 4 plugs when there's really 8 plugs, and all of a sudden people are getting misinformation?
There are definitely challenges with that. That's like the challenge of running any community, and so it's developing processes and checks and balances and reviews to make that happen. But luckily, like, we have a decent volume. We have, like I mentioned, we do about 150 million searches a month, and we have lots of feedback channels at this point. So if something isn't working, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly because people will tell us, and so that feedback loop is pretty tight.
Yeah. So the feedback that you're actually getting from the consumers, the people using the search engine and coming across these instant answers, you're taking a hard look at that and using that feedback to ultimately make, hey, this needs to be developed differently, or we need to find a new reference point because this isn't working. So that feedback loop is like the vein.
That's definitely true, but also, like, it generally doesn't happen because up front we're having good processes of, like, is this the best source? And ultimately we don't have this yet, but we'd like to have, like, okay, here there's a group of community members called the sports team, and they're like really knowledgeable sports people, and they're vetting some of this stuff,
Gotcha.
And then you have different teams in different areas. Like, for instance, we have a bunch of Bitcoin instant answers that just went up, and like the Bitcoin people in our community are very knowledgeable and very vocal about what they think is the best, and they're debating it on our forum, and it's all great.
Yeah, that's cool. Almost like topic ambassadors or whatever, people who can kind of usher in and are trusted sources to begin with, so they know where these places are. That's very cool. We have a question from one of the viewers, and I'm actually not familiar with OpenHub.net, but Denver asks, have you developed profiles on OpenHub.net? Do you know what that is, and can you answer Denver's question?
I am also not familiar with it, so I apologize.
All right, well then. Well, Denver, you'll have to connect later with Gabriel because no one knows what that is, and that's okay. And before we move on and change gears, because this is the cool thing about Google Hangouts, Ralph wants to know where you got that awesome poster behind you from. So for those listening later, Gabriel has a poster behind him, and Ralph Rivera wants to know where he got it from.
This is an eBoys poster, and so you can post a link to everyone if you want, but you search for like eBoys and you'll get it. It is a poster of various internet properties, like one of those is pixel art, and DuckDuckGo is in it. And I thought that was awesome enough to get it and put it on my wall. We're next to Angry Birds down there on the bottom.
That is awesome. So you didn't do any PR work to get yourself in there. They just put you in that post. So that is definitely, as the founder of a startup, that is definitely worth hanging up on your wall.
Right, exactly.
100%. That's awesome. So that kind of takes us, and you would think that I had done this before, into transitioning into the other topic that we really want to talk about today, and ultimately where I think a lot of the audience will take some serious not tactical, but strategies, ideas, things, and a new book to read. And that is the book that you just came out with, Traction. And so first, let's just dig into this. What is traction, and especially in the context that you're talking about it in your book today?
Sure. So traction, which is a word that gets thrown around in business a lot, the way we're defining it is sustainable customer growth. And as quantitative as possible, numbers behind it if possible. So, you're getting customers in the door, and you want to keep getting customers and growing whatever metric you have, whether it be revenue or engaged active users or something that's going up and to the right. That is traction.
So, one of the things that you did that I think is very cool is that you interviewed like 40 startup CEOs, professionals, all kinds of different people for this book. So I'm actually going to be publishing my own book here in the next couple weeks, hopefully to the public. And I've done some interviews for it. So how do you take all those ideas and put them into one concept? Because from 40 different people, and there may be more, but I know the number's right around 40. It seems like a lot to drill into. So how were you able to distill? And then once you were, what were the major concepts that you found?
Got it. So here's what happened. Here's a little story. So this started actually 5 years ago, if you can believe that or not. It's that long in the making. So to the end of 2009, DuckDuckGo is starting to kind of take off, but I'm struggling with how to get traction with it, which is a lot of people. They feel like I have a decent product, but how do I get more customers? I also started angel investing around that time and saw startups struggling all with the same concept. And this was also about the same time that lean startup and things like that were starting to take off. So people had a good framework for how do I approach product development to make a product that people would want, but they had no good framework to say, okay, I have a product that people like. How do I actually get growth with it? How do I make it into a successful business? And I saw that piece was the piece people were struggling with and was missing. So I literally went out, not to write a book initially, just to figure that out for myself. Like, is there a repeatable strategy that people use to get traction? So I did the first initial series of interviews just trying to piece apart people's miracle function, if you will, which is I started this business like Jimmy Wales in Wikipedia, for example, even not a business tagger, or Reddit with Alexis Ohanian, and said like, okay, I started this, it took off, and it was, I hit some kind of miracle to make it take off. Okay, what is that miracle? What exactly happened? What did you actually do on the day it took off? What was the thing that made it take off? So I peeled back all that, trying to find a repeatable strategy, and I ultimately did. I mean, like what I found was really two things. One is that all these different companies, and we probably studied, in addition to the interviews, maybe 100 other success stories. They all fell into these different channels or ways you can get traction. So there were 19 of them. And then the second piece was usually one of the 19 was the one that made them take off. They may have tried a bunch of things, but ultimately it was one channel that really drove the initial growth. And so the framework that we developed called Bullseye, which is basically trying to aim and shoot the bullseye to find the one channel that's going to make you take off. And the framework is how to do that, and so essentially we argue that you need to brainstorm all 19, because the other takeaway was people are biased for and against channels, and they don't think about all of them. They think about just what they're familiar with, like I'm going to run some Facebook ads or something, and not ever think about maybe putting up a billboard, which is one of the things that we did. And then, test them, and then ultimately, find the one that works and focus on it. So that's kind of what happened, and those are the major takeaways.
So I want people. I don't want to stop. I don't want you to give me all the magic so that people don't go and get the book.
I'm happy to reveal all the magic.
Right, okay.
The book is in two sections. The first part is the magic, kind of about the framework. Happy to tell as much about that as possible, all the magic. The last part of 19 chapters in the second part of the book is one chapter for each traction channel. So if you're going to go into SEO or SEM or content marketing or any of these things, it's a primer of how to do that. It has success stories, resources, etc. But the idea is if you read all of them, you'll then have a good idea basis to brainstorm for your own company to take every channel seriously. So you're not missing out on one that you initially, didn't do because you didn't have any experience with.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. So the first question that comes to my mind is 19 channels seems like a lot, right? So so when you're sitting down, you have your team with you, how do you attack this thing? Like, because to me, the bias thing seems like an enormous hurdle to jump. Knowing the startups that I know, the brick and mortar businesses that I know, the solopreneurs that I know, we all have these intense biases, specifically when it comes to marketing our business, which is strange but true. How do you attack this problem? The ones you hate first, the ones that you really are comfortable with first? Like how do you start to drill into these 19 channels?
So the way we recommend, and maybe it's different for different people because of their bias situation, but our recommended first step is going into a real brainstorming session. So, you've probably done this, but like real brainstorming sessions are, no idea is bad, and just throw out ideas and do this over over a period of like a week where you go through each one and you give each a shot of really trying to brainstorm how you could use each channel. So you might allot, some amount of time for each one, 15 minutes or something to do that. Pre-doing that, you should have done your competitive research and kind of been jotting down anytime you saw anyone use, successfully or unsuccessfully in your area, any channel. But the short answer is really delving into a brainstorming step where you force yourself to at least come up with a seemingly decent idea of a way to test each channel. So like speaking engagements, great idea, great channel, got a lot of people successful because, it often is the case for a lot of businesses that there is a place in the world where a lot of your customers congregate once or twice a year. However, people are terrified of public speaking. So they generally, not probably you because you're on this podcast, but they generally want nothing to do with it. But if it's the thing that is going to take your business to the next level, you should swallow that pill and get over it. And so, the brainstorming step says, okay, take a channel like speaking engagements and think, okay, are my customers in the same place? Is there a conference that if I was the keynote speaker at, it would like transform my business overnight, and that's your idea, now for testing it, you may not be able to get the keynote speaker at the biggest conference in the world, but maybe, there's some other way to test the channel where you're speaking at a smaller conference or something like that. But that's the idea. You're taking each channel seriously enough to come up with a promising idea within it.
Yeah, the first year they're probably going to stick you in like the closet with 7 other people they have to pay to sit in that room. But that's all right. If you keep going to the conference, they'll get you in there, everyone. Just so you know, speaking is not the most is just as much a popularity contest as anything else, but it can be incredibly powerful. So okay, so the first thing. So my follow-up question to this is I'm listening to this and that's starting to make sense to me. I want to. Does an enormous whiteboard come with the book as well? Because that would be an awesome product to come with the book. It's just like this huge, like expandable whiteboard that's like 10 feet wide. Would be amazing.
We do give you a spreadsheet, which is kind of a virtual whiteboard, if you will.
So now I have these channels. I understand I have to do all this brainstorming. Like the next, and this goes into everything almost, but how do you allocate the time? So you had said 15 minutes. Would you say, because startups in particular, solopreneurs and brick and mortars especially, people, these business types where often the decision makers are also doing a lot of the work, the number one thing they have none of is time. So
this is a perfect segue. So I'm going to challenge people's time resources here. So my argument in the book, Justin and I's argument, is that you should spend 50% of your time, even before you have a product out there, focused on getting traction, which is not what people are doing now. The normal, way people are doing it is ad hoc. They build their product or their service, then they go try to find traction. Even then, they spend a lot of time still tweaking their product, more than 50%. The reason why to spend 50% on it is because most companies die in that section of, the most common story is, I build a product that actually is useful, and then I run out of money because I couldn't get customers quickly enough and the growth quick enough to take off. And the sad part about it is the product, if they did it right, was actually good. The way to solve that is to start this traction stuff earlier so that when you launch, you know which channel to do and how it's going to take off. The only way to do that is to spend time on it.
Yeah.
So I would argue that the time they're spending on other things is way less important than finding this one channel that is going to take them off. So
Yeah.
the second step after this brainstorming step is, we advocate, and this is hard for some people, less hard for others, to get quantitative with it. So then, the next step is to rank and prioritize these ideas you came up with. But one way to do that is to try to guesstimate, how good an idea is it? How many customers do I think could really come through this channel? How much does it cost to acquire them? Are they the right type of customers, that I want? Out of that, you usually get a few ideas that are way better than others initially. They just look way better on paper. But you still don't know which are going to work, so then we advocate testing them. Finding a cheap test to go out and put your guesstimate numbers to make real numbers and to try to assess, okay, how much actually would it cost to acquire a customer here? Are these good customers? And how many customers are there for the channel? Assuming one of the tests go well, then you focus on that one and see if you can really make it work.
Yeah. So when you are, so I love that the 50% of your time should be spent gaining traction. How do you know when you have the minimum amount of functionality into your product that you can start to do this type of work? Because if you don't have any product, then maybe you can get a small amount of traction to an email list, generating buzz or something. But at what point, or how do you know, and I know this is 100% different for every single product, but in terms of kind of just theoretically, how do you know when you have just enough of a thing that you can start to get people to it where that 50%, where there's anything for the people that you capture with that 50% have something to do?
Got it. So it's way earlier than people think in their tendency. And let me give you an example and then a metaphor. So the example is Marketo, which people may be familiar with because it's a marketing software that went public last year.
Yeah, huge.
They started blogging and doing SEO and testing channels before they even had a product, talking about their product on their blog and communicating with people. And part of that was lean startup kind of thinking, like getting product feedback. But it was way more than that. They were building their email list. They were giving away things right from the beginning, such that when they launched, they had like 14,000 marketers and took off immediately. So you could actually, that's evidence that you can start before you have anything. His first hire was a full-time blog writer before they even built anything. So you can start as early as possible. The second metaphor that is, I think, useful to put it in context is the leaky bucket metaphor. So your product, when you start your service, is a leaky bucket. If you put money in it, it's going to flow out because the customers aren't going to stay because your product's not very good yet. However, you cannot tell where the holes are unless you have some water pouring through it, in this case customers, right? The early beta feedback, your friends, like running your little beta program, is not going to figure out all the holes because they're too close to you. You need some people coming through that are real market people who don't know you, who you're trying to test messaging on. If you do that, it doesn't have to cost that much money, and you can test these channels in the interim. So like while you're running these tests, you might be spending $250 a month on it or something, but you're getting a steady stream of people checking out your product, and you're following up with them, and you're seeing where they fall off. That's helping you plug the right holes. And this is my argument for, if you spend this time on traction, this 50% time doing that, you actually, even though you're spending less time on your product, you're actually getting to market quicker because you're spending the product time on the right thing, plugging these holes, as opposed to just what you think in your head the holes are. So my argument is you should definitely start early, way before you think the product is good. But you shouldn't ramp it up, right? Because the money is not going to convert into, it's not going to pay for itself. But you need to have some of it going through.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is it's much better to have a unfinished product, lots of customers problem, than it is to have a finished product, no customers problem.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
And I really like that Marketo example. And the fact that he hired a full-time blogger as his first employee, I think really speaks to the power of people need to build it. And this goes across everything. This is insurance agencies, which insurance is kind of my primary vertical. So brick and mortar, all the way into the kind of startup software space, which is the whole idea that you build it and then people come to the thing, only works in Kevin Costner movies. Like in real life, that's not a successful strategy.
Absolutely. We call that the product trap, which is, if you spend more time on the product, that'll equal more customers, and it is just not true.
Yeah, because no matter how good your product is, people have to believe in it. I mean, that's what it ultimately comes down. No matter what widget you're selling, if people don't believe in the thing, they're not going to buy it, no matter how good it is.
And they have to find you. They have to know about you. It is very for the build it, they will come thing to happen, right? Multiple things have to be true, which are never true. You have to have the exact right product. They have to find you organically, and then once they find you, they have to convince themselves essentially that it's the right product. All those things are not true. You generally have to go out there, bring people to you in some way, and then educate them through the sales process.
Yeah, and it's not just as easy as one touch too. And I hope I know that a lot of the people who listen to this show are kind of working on side businesses or in the middle of their startup or are brick and mortar, and you're thinking to yourself, how do I get out of this kind of trap? I know a lot of my insurance listeners are still in the cold calling trap, right? Like the important thing to listen, and Gabriel has said this in a couple different ways multiple times, you have to hit these people over and over and over again. The sole fact that you reach out once and touch them is not necessarily going to draw them in and become clients. And these are 19 different channels that he's talking about in this book, and I'm sure that it's some combination of hits on a couple different channels that ultimately turn them into clients, right? Like it's never just one touch and then client. It's, oh, I saw you on Facebook, I saw you over here on Reddit, and then I came to your blog and read 10 articles, bam, I want to become a customer.
Yeah, I would make another point, especially like for an industry like insurance that has traditionally been very sales focused, right? One of the things we saw over and over again was often the channel that was best for businesses was an underutilized channel in their market space, because the channel that is overutilized that everyone else is doing is competitive, and so the prices are a bit up there. But if you go and you try channels that are underutilized, you may get really good conversions just because it is kind of a novelty. And until other competitors follow you into it, you may just have kind of free reign in that channel.
Yeah. So this has been a great discussion, and I have one more question I want to ask you about this topic of traction. And you may have kind of answered this however you will. Where do you stand on the idea when it comes to getting traction and acquiring these leads and ultimately customers, to the be everywhere versus owning a platform or owning a way to get to them? So like you have the biggest and baddest blog, but you're not really on social media and you're not doing much with traditional advertising or local advertising, but you just have this amazing platform. Or should you be sprinkling yourself in multiple different places and trying to be good at a bunch? What would be your thoughts on that?
So generally what we found is one channel drove most of growth in a particular growth pattern. However, if your channel is content marketing, then you need to be everywhere, you know, or SEO, you might need to be everywhere. But if your channel is, you know, offline events, and that is really what is driving everything, then you may not need to be everywhere online, you know. So it really comes down to me is you got to test them and then find the one that's working, and then you become the expert and you do all these strategies to try to do it. And if it's something like content marketing is really driving everything, then, you know, the cutting edge tactics are to be on these new platforms, you know, to take advantage of Google Plus when it first comes out or whatever it is, you know, or do Twitter in new and interesting ways that other people aren't doing. But if you're on a traditional channel and it's working for you and it's driving all of your growth, that might be right just to focus on that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love that. I love the idea of, you know, content marketing isn't a channel inside of inside of the digital space. It is a thing in and of itself, and being on all these channels is part of that. That's a really good thought. So, Gabriel, this has been a fantastic conversation. You know, it's funny. Denver's doing all the research on your book. He's 33 5-star reviews. He's already bought it and shared it all over social media. Denver, thank you for that. I'm sure Gabriel appreciates the support.
Absolutely.
Everyone who is listening or watching right now or watching the video replay in the future, I highly recommend the book. I have watched, you know, being in the content marketing quasi SEO game for a while now. I've watched DuckDuckGo. I've seen what he's done. He's done it for himself, so you know that the quality is going to transcend into this book. And just the people that you talk to, you have to have picked up some of that. So there's tons of good stuff in there. I encourage you to go out and get it. The book will be in the show notes. And the link is also in the show description here. Gabriel, is there any place else that you want people to connect with you? Where would be the best place for people to find out more about you and what you're doing?
Best place to connect with me is like I connected with you on Twitter. It's YEGG is my username. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, man. This has been a great conversation. And with that, we are going to get out.